Hello and welcome in.
Please do not leave your luggage unattended on the station.
Welcome to the show. Oh, welcome in. Girl Sports Off Ice Postgame Live. Megan. What? I don't really know how to talk about what we just saw.
I feel like we just have to be honest every step of the way. There are some good things, there are some bad things, highs and lows, and in the immediate, we're allowed to be excited that the Avs collected 2 points and successfully completed the comeback.
Boy, was that an ugly hockey game.
It was tremendously ugly. It was hideous. That's the part of the honest truth, too, that we have to dig into here.
So genuinely, I texted you in the third period and I was like, yeah, don't want to even talk about whatever this is. And I really was. I was initially kind of looking at that in the third period. There's like, I've got maybe 10 minutes worth of stuff to say about this. Truthfully, that hasn't changed terribly, except for the Avs get a little bit of luck there in the third period with the health of Marty Netchis. And they get partial credit for, like you said, completing a comeback and getting 2 points. At the end of the day, that's all that really matters this time of year. But Megan, we're just going to dive right into it, start right off the top. Lack of urgency doesn't even begin to describe what we saw in that first period. Just flat. Just felt like flat. Don't know if the Avs are looking past this game or what, but not a good first period showing for the Avs in Chicago.
No, it was disappointing. It felt like there was a little bit of a jump in the opening minutes, but having that Malinsky goal called back seemed to deflate them a little bit, and not enough people rallied around that moment outside of Sam Malinsky individually to bring the intensity needed to kind of rectify a goal that comes off the board. It felt like through the rest of that first period, Sam Malinsky was the only one with a little bit of jump in his game for the full 20.
Mm-hmm. Sam Malinsky scores a beautiful goal, great feed from Val Nichushkin, and then a really nice little kind of double clutch curl and drag into his feet, and then just blows the puck by Spencer Knight. But Brock Nelson was offside by about a half inch, so that negates all of the positive. And like you said, that goal for the Avs, and I don't necessarily know if it even took the wind out of their sails, but it just felt like they never really recovered after that.
Yeah, you know what bothers me is it's not, I use the word deflate, but there wasn't a balloon to pop, so to speak. It was like they were really apathetic about this goal coming back. And I don't think they cared as much as they should to right that wrong. Like, okay, well, let's get a real one that counts. And I think that's a little disturbing.
And look, we Vaguely's in the chat correctly pointing out that if you go look at the fancy stats for tonight, the Avs controlled the bulk of the play. But to me, they had the puck on their stick. I was watching with my beautiful wife. We were sitting there watching the game, and she goes, I see the shots counter keep ticking up, but it doesn't really feel like they're doing anything. And if my wife is making that analysis part of the way through this game, like that tells you how just, kind of flat. And I don't want to say going through the motions, because I do think that undersells a little bit of what they were doing out there. But just nothing felt threatening. Nothing felt coordinated. And it was just kind of disjointed all night long, even though the Avs did physically have the puck on their stick for most of the night. So not only do they get the Sam Malinsky goal called back and they kind of struggle to bounce back, they then get a power play, and it's like, all right, here's your chance to kind of get back on the horse and get back going north. And instead they give up a shorthanded goal. And again, I'll use the word disjointed.
Yeah. that's born from a broken play, kind of a fluke thing. That happens. It's unfortunate. It's weird. You have to survive that a little bit better. Again, just a bit of apathy that the Avs seem to have in response to now the Malinsky goal and the shorthanded goal against, because they had a power play opportunity, and they squandered it. That should have been maybe where there was some intensity, and there just wasn't. I don't want to get outside of the first period either, but in talking about the analytics of this game, there are ways in which Colorado was involved, maybe more than I'm giving them credit, because I just didn't think the energy was appropriate. I think you saw more energy in this sequence past the midway point in the second period.
Yep.
And similarly, the Avs do draw 4 penalties tonight because they were, with their speed, still hard for a young Chicago Blackhawks team to contain. And so they were able to capitalize on the vulnerability of the youth in that way. But they also still squandered those man advantage opportunities, to include allowing the shorthanded goal against in the first period. I think that they make gradual improvement in the second period compared to the first.
Yeah.
But the 2 moments of apathy that stand out in the first are concerning, because they just dropped a pretty disappointing game to Calgary. And in maybe not so different a fashion. I think there were gradual improvements from that game to this in terms of Calgary's physicality. They out-physicaled the Avs in this last game. So the Avs were playing a little bit more of a checking game, but it felt like it could be better. There were players like Malinsky and Lindgren who I noticed were defending the blue line pretty
Lindgren
well.
had a really good game.
I thought Lindgren had a good game. I think coming out of the first period too, there were some positive standouts, and I have some on the whole of this game, so I won't get ahead past the first period, but it's just a little bit of an anomaly then of a game. I think the biggest concern is in that first period, in addition to those 2 moments of apathy, there are uncharacteristic mistakes. There were 7 giveaways in that period, and 5 of them were committed by a combination of Makar, Nichushkin, and McKinnon. Your top guys are turning over the puck, and so that's a lack of attention to detail. These are some of the smartest players in the North American Hockey League, National Hockey League,
North American.
In the NHL. And so those types of mistakes are unusual. And I expected a little bit more frustration from the team after the result in the Calgary game. And so the apathy with the uncharacteristic mistake, lapses in judgment, it didn't leave a very good taste in my mouth coming out of the first period.
Well, it just felt very, like I said, I Scott Wedgwood in the interview that we did with him last week, he even talked about, I can't remember what exactly was the phrase he used. He goes, look, I don't want to say, oh, they don't care, because I think everybody cares. And that's how I feel about tonight. But it did just feel a little bit like, well, we're going to just come out, take it to these guys, get out of here, get on the plane, get to Columbus, and dial it back up. And I do think that there is something to say. You and I talked, I believe it was last week, about the fact that this Avs team feels like it's moving back towards that point that we saw them a few years ago, where they're just flat out better than teams. And they can have off nights and still find ways to come out with wins. That was honestly a little bit of how I felt tonight. You made that point about, they were still tough for a young Chicago Blackhawks team. That to me was what I saw play out a lot once you got beyond the first period. This was just an Avalanche team that was just better and more skilled, but we're lacking exactly what you were just talking about, that attention to detail, committing to their system, being smart, both with the puck on their stick and away from it. It seemed like the communication wasn't quite where it needed to be. And that to me was the part that's just like it feels like they're looking toward the end of the season. I want to be clear with at least my view of this. This game tonight did not change the way that I feel about who this Avalanche team is and what it is they can accomplish. But that to me was a disappointing effort, especially in the first period. That is just something that you need to look a little bit inward and say, okay, that's the last time we do that. we're not doing that anymore here the rest of the way, because you have a lot of games the rest of the way against teams that are trying to get into the playoffs. You're now kind of, I mean, if St. Louis ever loses again, you are kind of back into a little bit of that range where you got to make sure that you're keeping an eye on who's behind you. And what vaguely put in the chat here is exactly where I'm going with this. I'm not overly concerned with what the record is down the stretch here. I think this is a team that's built for playoff hockey and that they're going to be able to dial it up when they need to that level, but just don't let bad habits creep in. And when you play games like tonight and you're going through the motions, exactly what happened in the first period happens. Not only do the Avs give a shorthanded goal and really have an uninspired first 20 minutes, they lose Jonathan Drouin with a lower body injury. We haven't gotten an update yet on that. He didn't return for this game. It could be precautionary. Hey, we're playing the Blackhawks. There's only a couple weeks till playoffs. We'll see. But that's the kind of stuff that happens when your details aren't sharp.
I think it's a great point from Vaguely and yourself, because Jared Bednar often talks about how he doesn't just measure his team based on the result. And I think this is an interesting game to dig into that, because there's a lot of their process that I think he can demand better, even though they get the winning result. I think the comment around Drouin is really important too, because losing Drouin seemed to make them appear more disjointed, especially at the start of the second period. They get a power play opportunity in the opening 4 minutes or so. And so you have Brock Nelson back on that top unit. And this has been 2 units that have been so dangerous lately. And it has been such a threat for Colorado. But even just losing Jonathan Drouin was such a variable that they had trouble pivoting in place of. And so I felt on the whole of the power play opportunities, they never fully adjusted to the loss of Drouin. I actually felt too, like some of the looks on the second unit became the better one because it consisted of some of the same players that have been on it. So that's players like Lehkonen and Ross Colton, his line with Coyle and Lehkonen created some chances outside of the power play. I think that's why it translated to some success in terms of creating opportunities on the second unit. But I wanted to highlight the importance of Jonathan Drouin and why I think that did have some impact on the result at the start of the second period, because past the midway point, the Avs did put a flurry of chances on Spencer Knight. And, through that point, a lot of their attempts had been missed or blocked. So either their shot selection just wasn't so good, or those young defenders on the Chicago side were managing their lanes pretty well. Avs were fighting through that in the second period past the midway point, and were driving inside ice and getting more chances to the net front. And I liked some of the passing plays that they were coming up with. And so that's where it felt like maybe it was shaking off the apathy of the first period, or shaking off the disappointment of losing Drouin. Whatever it was, there was improvement. And so I want to make note of that too. I think the third period, though, they didn't sustain some of that improvement as much as I would have liked from the end of the second to the start of the third, but there are moments inside the game that I think they took some steps forward. And I look at players like Ross Colton, Charlie Coyle. This might have been my favorite Charlie Coyle game, for example.
Oh, interesting. All right.
And I'm getting a little ahead of myself because it's not something specific to just inside the second period that he did, but I felt he was one of the bright spots of this game. And the top guys had a little bit to prove, but obviously we know how this ends. It comes down to them in the end. But the second period, I just, the Connor Murphy goal, I think Scott Wedgwood played a terrific game. Yeah, another great game that he kept them in it when they maybe didn't deserve it. So no fault for him on that one. The Avs got hemmed in for that goal in the second period. And so that's where the attention to detail, just having a cleaner breakout, because they were losing some battles along the wall. And honestly, it felt a little apathetic again, to be honest with you, because I do think that they could have outbodied in some of these battles and come up with pucks. And instead they got hemmed in their end, extended shift. And I think that they committed to the strong side of the puck a little too much, and you lose Connor Bedard below the goal line, and that's exactly the result that you get. And so that's where I think they cleaned it up a little bit in not allowing that type of opportunity going into the third period. And they also met that goal against with more chances of their own, getting a little bit more dangerous past the midway point. But it's that attention to detail, like that margin of error in the playoffs. We'd be happy if this was game one in a 7-game series. Like, okay, well, they come up with the win, right? But that's not the room we're in just yet. We can be pretty critical of these final games because we want to see them paying attention to these details ahead of game one in the playoffs.
Well, and so I want to go back to what you were talking about with the goal that Chicago scored. To me, that because they get hemmed in their own end, but the issue with that to me is how many board battles did they lose in an attempt to get that puck out, and then they turn it over. And that's the stuff. Those are the things to me that I look at. Like, look, you're going to end up in your own end, probably once or twice a game, regardless of who you're playing against. You're going to end up with a prolonged shift in your own end. To me, that's just the Avs not being strong enough on the puck, not committed to getting the puck up and out. Like you said, sloppy details, and again, going back to our conversation with Scott Wedgwood, I know he says like, to me, every goal is on me. That's one where it's just like you got to provide some support for your goaltender. You got to get the puck up, you got to get it out, you got to be sure on your stick, and you got to find a way to win a board battle. I'm not saying that you're not going to come up with every loose puck along the wall, but in moments like that, like you pointed out, you've been stuck in your own zone for a couple minutes. Find a way to dig out a puck, and even if you got to ice it, settle things down, get the puck up and out of your zone. That to me was the bigger problem that I saw in the second part of that game. And I agree with you that they started getting better through the midway point, but it was just still too inconsistent. And the one thing that I do want to point out back at the very beginning of what you said there about losing Drouin, I got a DM the other day, or maybe it was even today, that was like, hey, can you ask directly why Jared Bednar mixes up his lines so much? This is why. He likes to know what he's got. He likes to know what his options are. He likes to know what his combinations are, so that on a night like tonight, when you lose a guy like Drouin, hopefully if that were to happen in the playoffs, hopefully it doesn't take you, as you're pointing out, Megan, half of a period to start feeling comfortable again.
I think it's an interesting point because that was where I had optimism when Drouin left the game to get this power play kind of early into the second period because, hey, Brock Nelson's been that guy in the top unit before. They tried it out for a handful of games before switching back to Drouin. This shouldn't be so bad, right? Because it wasn't working with Nelson there on the top unit, but at least there should be some familiarity. And I completely agree. I'd rather them experiment with this in the regular season, now get some more reps with Nelson on the top unit, for example, so that he gets more and more comfortable there in case there is a universe where we have to rely on him more. Because you almost don't want to mess with the second unit as much. It stayed pretty consistent with what we've seen over the last couple of games. So that maybe wasn't the area that I would tinker with too much moving forward. And hopefully it's not too serious for Drouin moving forward and they're just being extra cautious.
Yeah. Not much else to say for me about that second period. Again, just massive inconsistency. And then to your point, as we transition into that third period, what good I thought the Avs did have, even that little flurry there right at the end in the dying seconds of the second, didn't really feel like it was carrying over. They start getting themselves in a little bit of penalty trouble. And right when it felt like this game was slipping away, right at about the halfway mark of the second period, Cale Makar finally gets one by Spencer Knight. Really nice pass from Nathan MacKinnon. And it was at that point you kind of do start to think like, okay, are they just good enough that they are just better than the Chicago Blackhawks and they'll be able to get over the hump? Eventually that's what they did. But like I said, Cale Makar breaks through and at least got the Avs back into it. Yeah,
that's why I would still categorize this as an ugly game, because I think it is won by just kind of sheer skill alone, but not the effort. The skill was there. That's what won the Avs this game. The effort wasn't. So they're so highly skilled. It's great that they can still pull out a win, but that's also where there's a little bit of frustration. I do want to give the penalty kill some credit. Through 3 kills, they only allowed 2 shots on net. And so it was pretty strong, but it was very inopportune. They're fighting for a tying goal, and they have to kill a penalty in the under 4 minutes that remain in the period. So they're putting themselves in the most challenging positions possible. And I think maybe that's a testament to just how highly skilled the Avs are. But you don't want to do backflips and cartwheels because, as we know, the recipe for winning a cup for the 2022 team, for example, absolutely relied on the high-end skill that the Avs had, but they had to work their butts off just to get across the finish line.
Yeah. And like you said, you give credit for to the penalty kill. But yeah, you just don't want to be putting yourself in that situation because suddenly you're having to take opportunities up ice and you're having to fly the zone while you're down a man, and you're just putting yourself in situations that you don't want to be in. And again, it's just one of those things where, you don't want to make a habit of having to get up ice while you're trying to kill a penalty. Marty Netchis, as we moved a little bit further into this third period, Marty Netchis is involved in a weird play in front of the net. The Avs kind of a net mouth scramble trying to break things up. And he ends up, a player for Chicago kind of falls back on him while he's laying on his stomach, kind of torques his neck back. Sounds like after the game, he said that he heard a pop. So a little bit freaked out, but he left the game. So at first, and I even said to tweet, that was like, yeah, this is a disaster night for the Avs. You lose Drouin, you lose Netchis. Right now, it looks like you're going to lose the game. Cale Makar then scores, and Marty Netchis comes back, and he is the one who, at the end, gets the last stick on it before the puck deflects into the net. So that is a moment that, despite all of this, similar for me to the Dallas and Montreal games, where it's like, all right, we just played terrible, but we went from thinking that we lost this guy for the game to him coming back and being the one to get us to overtime. That is something positive that I think you can really take out of the end of this game.
You can definitely feel pretty good about that because he came back and he looked strong and he made a difference and he was involved in a couple of net front chances at the end of the regular period leading up to the tying goal, of course. And so after losing Duren, you just can't afford to lose another top 6 player that has been a big piece of getting points over the last stretch and ever since he's come to Colorado. So that was a huge sigh of relief. And it's interesting too, because in talking about the Avs putting themselves in this disadvantageous place, you look at the penalties that they take, and it's because they're playing from a place of desperation that they get caught doing something that they shouldn't. And similarly, this is a defensive play where Netchis is trying to defend the way to the net in this net front scramble. And so you just look at, like, this should be such a cautionary tale why you don't want to put yourself in that position in games, because when you're playing from a desperate place and from behind, mistakes get made. And I won't go as far to say that that directly leads to injury, but it is a big learning lesson for the Avs, why it is just better to do the right things more consistently and early on, so you don't find yourself on the bad end of that.
Yeah, it's all just kind of like, going back to what I was talking about with Drouin. When you play games like this, that's when it feels like you open yourself up to silly injuries, stemming from weird plays like that. And again, to your point, having to make, desperation plays at the net mouth, you open yourself up.
Because you're getting beat there, and that's
right,
why
right.
Nazar's butt's in your face. And
right.
I'm glad it wasn't a worse result. And this isn't me saying, like, well, you get what you deserve, because it's not what Marty Netchis deserves. It's just the team as a whole. Don't put yourself in that place.
Right. And yeah, it's just when you let games like this hang around, you end up with, freak goalie performances, weird injuries, when you have games like this where you're not committed and you're not paying attention to the details of your game, you end up with injuries and all kinds of stuff. We get to overtime. Overtime was overtime. Kind of slow. Both teams kind of trading chances. Logan O'Connor gets a great look in overtime, stopped by the knob of Spencer Knight's stick. Nothing really in overtime. Any thoughts on the extra frame?
I've seen now two really strong defensively OT periods from Brock Nelson. So
Yes,
he was able to take away the puck and help to get the puck back up ice and transition the right way. I also thought this was huge from Wedgwood. He came up with two big saves on Levchinov on Chicago's side of things. So another credit to Wedgwood, who kept them in this game from start to finish down to the shootout, which I feel a lot of sympathy for him being put in that position. But not only did I like the defensive plays from Brock Nelson in the OT period, but he wins the draw in the dying seconds of regulation that helps lead to the game tying goal. So there's a lot of criticism around how Brock Nelson's game is fitting in with the Avs. I don't think it has as much pop as maybe we expected because of Nazem Kadri and what he meant to the Avs as a 2C in the past. But this is where I continue to drive home the point about having a mature, experienced, responsible player. I look at how that OT period played out, and it just never got super dangerous for Chicago. And that's a good thing.
Up until the very last second when Nate lost his guy.
Yeah.
No, I'm with you on Brock Nelson, and there was even a play. Geez, I think it was in the third period where it was kind of a scramble in front of the net, and he was trying to find a puck that was loose in the crease, trying to punch it home, and there was just when it didn't go, Spencer Knight covers it, you get a whistle, and there was just kind of a look of frustration on his face, and I think this has been a difficult adjustment for Brock Nelson, going from lifelong Islander to coming to a system that is a lot more. There's a lot more pace to it. There's a lot more emphasis on offense. I think it's just been a little bit of a difficult adjustment for him, but I do think this is a guy who could really be big for the Avs in the playoffs if he can get that figured out, at the right time. But to your point, he's finding ways to contribute other than on the score sheet. And I think that is so important for a guy like Brock Nelson, who might be still struggling to adjust a little bit. He's finding ways to contribute, whether that be defensively, through winning draws. He's become a guy that Jared Bednar trusts in overtime, and we know that that's not an easy thing to earn. But he's helping them establish helping them establish possession, and to your point, at the end of that game, zone control by winning faceoffs clean. Into the shootout, interesting choices from Nathan MacKinnon. I'm losing my mind, Megan. Interesting choices from Jared Bednar. Not in necessarily who he's picking, but just that in 3 shootouts that we've seen now in the last couple of weeks, just completely different lineups for all 3.
No offense to the shooters from the last shootout. This one felt like, in terms of the person, it made a lot more sense to me. But down to the move, I think is where it is interesting, like Nathan MacKinnon's choice. I don't know if I've personally seen that before, that reach behind, but it worked. And so I can't be mad about it.
Well, he's normally a shooter, and I wonder if that's what Spencer Knight was waiting for.
Right.
And to your point, I mean, I can think of a couple from years back where he would make a cheeky little move and slide a puck 5-hole or something like that. But for the most part, he likes to come in, draw goalies out a little bit, and beat them with a shot. And so to your point, yeah, it was just interesting to see him go with something a little bit different there. But yeah, these selections just made a little bit more sense to me at baseline. But then after how much we've talked about Charlie Coyle being good in the shootouts and the best percentage guy, I also just found it interesting that he didn't go. But the Avs find a way to get done in the shootout. Arturi Lehkonen, not going to count on the score sheet as a goal, but another clutch goal for Arturi Lehkonen.
A quietly good game from Lehkonen too, because the top guys were getting pretty stifled in some of their chances, whether it was Spencer Knight coming up with big saves. I want to shout out to the goalie duel tonight on the whole. Spencer Knight played a great game in that too. And so he made Colorado's life pretty difficult, in talking about maybe some of the apathy and lack of work and lack of intensity. Spencer Knight also had a say in this game, and I think he's a big factor in why it shook out the way that it did. But all that to say, when the top guys weren't getting it done with creating chances, there were flashes from a Lehkonen, Coyle, Colton combination that I really liked. And I like then to see Lehkonen get rewarded being a difference maker in the shootout of this game, because you probably wouldn't be thinking of him much after it otherwise.
Yeah. Look, at the end of the day, I don't. You made the comment earlier. Like Jared Bednar, I don't judge the team just based on the result and say, well, they found a way to win, so it's it's a positive. No, there's a lot of things you got to get figured out in this game. But also, like we've heard from Jared Bednar in recent weeks, this time of year, all that does matter is what result you get. And the Avs got the result they needed tonight. Like we talked about off the top, yeah, Dallas likely too far out of reach now, but you are keeping an eye on what's happening behind you. And you did yourself some favors. You're keeping yourself locked into that 3 spot there. And you took care of business against a team that you should beat. Doesn't matter how you get them at the end of the day. We do have a super chat from our guy, Vaguely. Jesse's Mucinex bender still ongoing. No, it ended after one night. That was such a miserable night of sleep. I was like, and we're done with this. But I guess maybe I'm still feeling the residual effects of that terrible night's sleep.
Yeah, maybe you just sound a little congested, but...
Oh, I do sound a little bit congested. You are right.
I think so. I think that's where it's from. And honestly, I just think it's a funny joke now that we were all hopped up on Mucinex.
Well, I was going to say, and I did. It made me feel weird that night and that whole next day. It definitely made me feel weird, but it scared me off of it. Scared me off of it.
There's 2 things I wanted to talk about, discourse that came up over the course of this game. I wanted to dive into the concern around Jared Bednar's coaching, specific to motivating his players. Because, this was a pretty disappointing game for a good chunk of it in terms of not getting enough intensity from the Avs. And this has been a topic now we've been floating around the locker room, where maybe you don't control your playoff picture completely, that some of this is going to be reliant upon what other teams do as well. So what keeps you motivated this time of year, right? And we continue to hear that the motivation among this group is high because they believe they can do something really special. So that does make it feel a little weird then with how this game started and then played out for probably 45 minutes. But the other part of it is Jared Bednar can provide that roadmap to winning and put players in opportunity and give them information to win this game against a very beatable Chicago Blackhawks team. But at the end of the day, it takes the players caring. We talked about Nazem Kadri's comments about the 2022 team too, how they were so self-motivated and they self-reflected after every game that it didn't involve Jared Bednar needing to motivate them. So to me, it's more of a concern that we're even talking about where this team's motivation is placed and pointing to Bednar. I am not ultimately worried that the team lacks motivation on the whole. I think they underestimated Chicago a little bit too much at the start of this game and ended up chasing it for longer than they needed. And as long as they continue to learn these lessons, right? Like you go to Columbus tomorrow on the second leg of a back-to-back and you tell yourselves, okay, we underestimated lesser competition. This is a team that has wanted to bolster a wildcard bid when nobody expected that they were going to, and we might not have our legs fully under us, but we have a rested goaltender. We might be without Jonathan Drouin, so we need to dig a little bit deeper in this game.
Yeah, and to me, I don't even necessarily look at it as motivation per se. It's just playing with urgency, and I think you're right. I'll use the phrase look past, because here's the other element to this too. It was an 8:52 p.m. puck drop in Chicago. The Avs then are getting on a plane, flying to Columbus. You're going to lose an hour. The Avs are going to get to their hotel around 4 a.m. and you got to play again tomorrow night. I really do, Megan. I think this was like you said, whether call it underestimating, call it looking past, call it whatever you want. I think they got into Chicago, said, yeah, let's get this game done and over with and get to Columbus so we can try to get to bed at a decent hour tonight. And I just don't think that they were ready to play tonight. Again, I don't think there's anybody in that room that doesn't care. I don't think there's anybody in that room that lacks motivation. I just think that they weren't ready to play tonight. And that happens. Everyone has days where they show up to work. They're just not mentally there. To me, that was what the Avs dealt with. Yeah,
it's a kind of a funky game against Chicago in April. I think that they, to your point, didn't totally get up for this game. So I'm going to more heavily scrutinize the answer to this game that they provide tomorrow against Columbus.
Yeah, me too.
I think there's more to prove from that.
And this right here, like, look, I get it. And I get that sentiment. I really do. You're in game number 76. There are 82 of these, and you are mentally gearing yourself up for a grind that people can't even really comprehend what they're about to, what their hope is to go through here over the next couple months. Look, I get it. It is. It's hard. It's hard for you and I to sometimes motivate ourselves to get to the rink this time of year. It's like, can we just get on to the playoffs? Do we have to go, another practice, another game? I get it. You want perfection for 82 games. Like I said, nobody shows up to work 82 days in a row with their absolute 110% effort. I'm not making an excuse for what we saw of the Avs tonight. Wasn't good enough for me for 50 minutes of this game. But hey, you found a way to drive the result. You got to dig into what didn't go well. Like you said, you got to dig in tomorrow, find a way to get another result that you want. And don't let it happen again.
And don't let it happen again. I also wanted to talk
about
what
was your other thing?
Goalies for a second. I think people were really concerned by Kevin Mandolisi being recalled, but we saw both Wedgwood and Blackwood participate in practice. I won't say fully because it was an optional practice ahead of flying out. I don't have reason to believe there's greater concern with the goalies at the moment. And Kevin Mandolisi has been an extra up in Loveland for some time because they've been leaning on Miner and Shield, who've been playing incredibly well. I just wonder if because they have nothing to lose, they wanted to get Mandolisi up. I wanted to know your thoughts on it.
My guess is something like Blackwood is sick.
I feel illness.
Yep.
It's been kind of this back-to-back illness issue too. People have been sick the whole month of March and can't seem to get past it. They get past one thing and then they're sick with a different thing.
So that was my guess, was let's bring him along in case one of our guys isn't feeling well enough to go tonight. Or maybe it's like a minor little tweak. And again, because you're getting near the end of the season here, hey, if either of your goalies have something that's making them feel a little bit uncomfortable, yeah, give them the night off. That's why you built a tandem like this, so that you can feel comfortable going to Scott Wedgwood on nights where you need to, or comfortable giving Scott Wedgwood nights off because you know who Mackenzie Blackwood is. That was how this struck me.
Same. I wanted to assuage any fear around the goalies. I don't have reason to believe it's something really bad.
Yeah, I'm with you. And, we'll see tomorrow. It was it's a back-to-back. So again, if one of them wasn't feeling well, you can understand why they'd want to have another goalie here in case you're needing, to have someone go tomorrow. Megan, anything else on this one?
No, I think that was everything.
That's all I've got. I'm not going to, like I said, with about 10 minutes left in this game, we got about 40 minutes more out of this postgame show than I was originally anticipating. So there you go. In the last 10 minutes plus extra time. The Avs got 30 extra minutes of talking out of us.
Thanks, Avs.
Thanks, Avs. We appreciate it. All right, that's going to do it. She's Meghan Angley. I'm Jesse Montano. Tomorrow is Thursday. No shows. We'll be back at it on Friday. We've got a busy weekend coming up at Gorilla Sports. A fun announcement coming tomorrow that is a Gorilla Sports thing, not so much a Megan and I thing, but we're always getting involved in new areas, and we've got some fun stuff coming tomorrow, and then we've got some really fun stuff coming very soon that we cannot wait to share with you guys. Literally, Megan and I are being forced to wait to share with you guys, and people are getting sick of us asking when we can share with everyone. So great stuff coming at Gorilla Sports. But as always, guys, thanks so much for hanging out, for coming along, and we will talk to you more later. Have a good one.